I think that we are all of us, so just for the sake of time, we can start with the actual first content session of this BGIN block number 6. And the first session deals with digital identities in a broad sense. On the one side, what happens with the kind of identities that can be implemented in digital environments, perhaps with reverberations on blockchains, and eventually as well, how you can obtain information that is contained inside of the blockchains, how can you parse this data in order to actually gather more information about the identities that are stored there. That's, I think, the logic of the session today. And it is for me a pleasure to welcome the first speaker of this blockchain, of this block number 6, that is David Buchner, who is the head of Decentralized Identity at Block. Before his current position, he was the lead open source and standards at Decentralized Identity at Microsoft, and also the executive director of the Decentralized Identity Foundation. David, it is a pleasure to welcome you. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I'll talk to you a little bit today about an initiative that, maybe you saw a little bit online that had a sort of controversial name. We're calling it Web 5, but I think you'll see for good reason. It certainly encompasses an identity. I think the notion that we put forward is that identity is really everything. Everything is, a descriptor in some way of you, whether it's your grocery list that you type into like Google Keep, a Notes app, or it's your emails you send. And there's a lot of personal information that's contained inside all of the apps and services you use. And, any of that is identity information. So really, most of what you do on the web today or in your personal devices is identity. At least that's how we see it. So Web 5 is a new set of protocols that allow you to have identity interactions that encompass all of apps and services, and we want to make them a bit more decentralized. It'll be light on the blockchain. We don't think a lot should go on a blockchain or involve it. There is a small aspect to it that's very important, but you'll see that our proposal, our approach is not heavy in that regard. So let's dig in a little bit. Really this Web 5 proposal that we have, this initiative we're working on, is about evolving the web to be what we want it to be. Today, the model is very service-centric. It's not something that is owned by users in terms of the identities that they use online and the ways they exchange information and who owns and custodies their information. It's usually sort of hurled into these silos, and it's used for their purposes, but it's also used for the purposes of a lot of others as well. So what we'd like to do is create a web where communication and financial activities and all the other apps that we use every day that we really cherish are more user-centric, or more built around the user. And that starts with them owning their identity and data and having the ability to do so at a platform level. So what is Web 5, right? We made this kind of audacious term, and really the spirit of it is, Web 2 is great. Web 2 in the sense of all the traditional apps and services and infrastructure that we have. We don't want to throw that out. There's a lot of good technology. It's not like we're going to recreate it, but we do have to evolve it. And then Web 3, I think there's a lot in spirit that you see in this Web 3 movement out there that I can kind of resonate with. You want things to be more decentralized, but at the same time, I think in a lot of ways they took an approach that over financialized certain things. The token crazes and everything being on a blockchain and that sort of stuff. That's just not really something that resonates with us. So while the spirit's right, I think the approach and the execution might not be right. So we kind of wanted to evolve it, and we're being a little goofy, taking a step right over Web 4. Just going to Web 5. It's kind of a joke, but the tech is serious. And what is it? Well, we believe it's a more decentralized web platform that enables true decentralized apps using decentralized identifiers, which are a standard in the W3C that was just ratified, as you may have seen and announced, and these things called decentralized web nodes, which are personal data stores, so you can own and control your own information. We're just calling this combination of technology Web 5 because it's a nice term to roll everything up under. So what are the pillars, the actual technologies behind it? I mentioned one, decentralized identifiers. Another really big one is verifiable credentials, forming trust digitally, the ability to have something that you can verify. And then the last one being a personal data store, where users can be more in control of their own information and store their own data. So what are decentralized identifiers? For anyone that doesn't know, they're self-generated and self-owned IDs, as opposed to the ones that we have today, which are really always rooted in being owned by companies most of the time. A few governments engage in owning your IDs. This is not really what we want. We've seen problems with that. What from emails to DNS, other stuff, things get regularly interdicted or suppressed, depending on where you're at in the world, what government you live under, or what a certain company might think of you, or a mob sort of gathers and has someone sort of digitally unperson you. And, all those things were not as big a deal when the web and the digital IDs we use on it were mostly constrained to sharing like cute little photos of things you did on the weekend. But, as we move into a world where digital identity is kind of becoming the basis of, human interaction more and more every day, it gets a little scary when you can think that a company or a government can sort of sever you, not only from your credentials, like, your driver's license or something, but can actually sever you from the identifiers that your friends and family know you by, that you communicate with, that all your data is tied to. And, it's a really powerful control point, and we think that that should be more decentralized. So DIDs do that. Next piece is verifiable credentials. So if you're not familiar with this, is another W3C standard. It's basically a digital proofing format for assertions. So you might have an issuer that can make assertions about a subject, in this case Alice, and say something about her, that she has a bank account in this case. Give her a verified digital proof that another verifying entity can inspect and validate independently. And so this is just sort of the basis of trust and exchange of information in a world that has DIDs and more verified forms of data. And then lastly, to kind of make the whole apps piece real, like real decentralized apps. We're not talking about these sort of blockchain token, interfaces. I mean the apps that you use on your phone every day. Like your message apps and Twitter and all that other stuff. We want to actually see decentralized versions of those. We've got to have powerful user data stores. So we call these things decentralized web nodes. We're working on it now. This is probably the least formed standard, but it's underway. The principle here is that these are replicated masterless personal data stores that can do, large binary storage. They can asynchronously send messages between participants. They have encrypted data capabilities. So your data remains under your control, even if you have versions of them being hosted. And you can switch. There's no sort of provider lock-in involved. It's because it's a replicated system and you have your data on your devices and other places. You're never in a lost condition. So one thing that all three of these technologies need to sort of bring it to the user is identity wallets. So some form of user agent that people can engage with to manage their DIDs, to manage their data and exchange credentials and have all the UI that they need to facilitate that. So we're working on a wallet for this that should be out sometime in 2023. And there's several other companies that are implementing these standards as well. So I think you'll see more of these apps, and even well-known companies like Microsoft implement parts of this, like DID and verifiable credential aspects. So what is the full topology? Sort of we zoom out and put all these components together. Well, in this view that we have here of Alice and Bob, if Alice knows Bob's DID, she can resolve it. She can find service endpoints, essentially links to Bob's decentralized web nodes, things that contain data. She might want to query for some information from Bob. She might have sent Bob a message that Bob can return later. Maybe it's asking for a credential or some other shared data. And so Bob eventually receives the request as it replicates from a cloud and always available cloud version down to his down to his device, and is able to act on that because he knows Alice's DID. And the whole sort of central premise of DIDs is that if you know someone's DID and the method is robust and supports service endpoints, you can always sort of have a place in inbox to return their call. And that's sort of what we want to make possible, and not something that goes through email or some one-off protocol, but that handles all forms of data and communication. So, if we look at the stack, Web5 and the stack, we have the whole underpinning part, the enabling part, which is centralized identifiers at the bottom, these data stores, DWeb nodes, and then the kind of the decentralized web app model. And that's like how you would actually build applications on the substrate. And then on top is the actual apps, like DWAs, like Blue Sky for Twitter would be an example of them pursuing, some form of decentralized version of Twitter. We want to make those use cases possible. So to understand DWAs, if you're not familiar, you might want to understand what PWA is, and that's an existing concept in all web browsers that's built on a set of standards that you'll kind of see in the next slide, and it provides a more native experience. So if you've ever been in your desktop browser or a mobile browser and it says, do you want to install this website? And you can actually have an icon on your desktop, and it shows it shows up just like another app, right? But it's a web app, and when you open it, instead of having a web browser and tabs, it's got its own frame. It's it looks more themed. It looks more app-like, and it has some offline capabilities that you unlock because you've used these set of progressive web app standards. So those are great. It's a great evolution to see the web become more app-like and more native feeling. But still, it is a provider-driven model in the sense that you're installing a website. It's assumed that most of the data is going to be in the server of the company. So we want to change that paradigm. And this is how, roughly how we believe we'll get there. Instead of installing a service worker, which is a technology that's standard in the web that, goes back and forth between a local cache and a centralized server, we want to kind of marry these Web5 APIs into the browser so developers can include them and create PWAs that are really DWAs that store their data with your DWeb node and the DWeb nodes of your participants, your peers, so that we're less reliant on centralized servers. So, some examples of all of this running, right? So very simply, in the credential example, if Alice, knows the DID or finds the DID of a bank, for instance, she might want to inspect that bank. She might want to, see if that bank is a legitimate bank. So in this case, she knows the bank's DID. She can, dial up the DWeb node of the bank and request, for instance, the bank's chartering information, which is probably going to be in the form of a verifiable credential signed by some reputable source. So she might get that back and verify it, as one does verify the credential, and then gain some form of trust in that institution. But it extends beyond, just simple identity proofing trust. One of the use cases we're very interested in, this thing that we're building on Web5 called TBDEX, which is a DEX for cryptocurrency and fiat exchanges. You kind of think about it as like a decentralized version of Swift. It enables any PFI, we call them participating financial institution, bank exchanges, anyone else, traditional finance, DeFi, to be able to exchange value through this identity layer. So if Alice knows a bunch of potential counterparties, she can send these messages to their DWeb nodes and say, hey, I want to exchange X for Y, and they can send her back these, so kind of a request for quote system, but it all uses Web5. It's really like 90% Web5, and it's about 10% this TBDEX protocol that we write on top of it. And you can see how the messaging is facilitated by the identity pieces of the stack. Really, it's just a different set of messages at the end of the day. But it goes into really traditional consumer scenarios as well, right? So if I have a DWeb node and I want to be able to have, for instance, my music playlists everywhere. I want to have the same experience everywhere. I don't really enjoy redoing these bits of information that have to traffic from app to app. What I might do is I might allow Groove, which is a music player on Windows machines, access to my music playlists, and I'm updating and adding to them. And then at some future point, I want to install Tidal, which is a music app that Block makes on my, my mobile device. And I don't want to start from zero. I want to kind of jump right back into the experience. So I would give Tidal the same access, the same music playlist objects. And that allows Tidal to immediately boot up my experience. And when I make a change on something in one, it's reflected in another app. And that's just the sort of end-to-end seamless experience across that transcends company boundaries and all the traditional things you would see in Web 2. And so that the experience is more about the user instead of pouring yourself into a silo. Lastly, you're traveling a bit. This might have, for some of you, might be like your first large trip in a while, who knows? And it's a little unfortunate that all these bits and pieces, like your hotel reservation, your airline tickets, your car rental, all that stuff will typically only really be presented to you in any nice way by a corporate travel app, or maybe your email will make certain itinerary. I know Gmail does this, and they do it because they have complete access to everything you are, right? So it's a personal thing. You're really kind of at the behest of these large silo companies who have specific connections to these APIs or reading all your email. I think it'd probably be better if hotel reservations and airline tickets were all just verifiable credentials, and that they were all stored with your DWeb node, your personal data store, so that you can grant any app you want access to that particular corpus of information, and they can visualize, however you feel is best, and it puts you in more control, less snooping over all your stuff. And we just think that's kind of a better world. So what's the roadmap to get there? We're on the journey right now. We're building, some of the stuff is built. Decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials are already here as standards. I think there's implementation stuff we're doing to make that easier for people. But the technologies exist. The last one we're doing, DWeb nodes, are under development. We're really helpful. We can knock it out this fall, certainly before the end of the calendar year. And then come next year, by the end of next calendar year, we think we can be in a position where we deliver the holistic platform, Web 5, where any developer can take it for any purpose, whether it's core identity or it's decentralized app development, and produce something that is roughly equivalent to the apps you would see today. So at the end of the day, I've been in the identity community for a while. I guess my views are a little bit more expansive in terms of what I think identity is. When people say, how does it have to do with apps? I think if we were to really realize digital identity, we've always been building an app platform, even if we don't want to talk about it like that, because your identity is sprinkled through all these apps and services on the web, and so it's hard to get away from that being your identity. And I think that what we do with verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, and personal data stores is really return full ownership and control over your data and everything that makes you up to individuals, and that's always been the pursuit. So, I'm from TBD. It's a business unit of Block. You can go ahead and follow TBD at this, extremely long number that they're in, and they chose on Twitter. We have a Discord channel, and you can also contribute to our implementations of the open standards on GitHub. But yeah, that's all I had for today. I hope you join us on this journey and use the Web 5 stack as it is finished and pushed out to developers. So I can't hear it. I don't know if I'm saying if I need to do anything else.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can.
There was a real applause and not a virtual one on this room a few seconds ago. Thank you for your very nice presentation, Daniel. There were a few questions, and the first hand that I saw was Sina's. Hold on, give me a second, Sina.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My question is regarding slide 11, if possible. Yeah. Please can share, that's fine.
Oh yeah, I'll share it. Just slide 11.
The progressive web apps and
that one there? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Oh, the one prior?
The 11, yeah.
Exactly. So
Okay.
could you please
Yeah.
elaborate on how working offline and discoverability could be possible at the same time?
Okay, so when we talk about working offline, it doesn't mean that like all features work offline. You know, discoverability in the decentralized app sense, you know, one of the things that a robust decentralized identifier method will give you is, and not all of them do this, right? Is typically in them you can crawl the did space. When I say crawl the did space, I mean like in ION, for instance, a well-known implementation that I worked on at Microsoft and others use. You could actually iterate all DIDs that are known and registered in the system, this sort of layer 2. And what that means is you could go to each one of the DIDs, and if there is a node online, when I mean offline, I mean like you might have your device offline because you're on an airplane flight, but you might have a running version that's like up in the cloud. And so if you iterated every DID and said, hey, you know, tell me about your public tweets, you know, things you want to message out to the world, you could go to all the DIDs and find and source all that information. So the offline stuff is mostly about, you know, if your client devices are offline, you're still going to be able to use the applications that you have on your client, and they should, you know, basically sync with your personal data stores when they come back online. And those data stores then again become, you know, essentially replicated copies, so that you're always in possession of your data and kind of maintain that state. So it's more of a capability to make sure that you have an app-like experience when you don't have connectivity on a device.
Okay, thanks.
I think that the next question was by Leon, if I recall right.
Thank you. Great presentation. And speaking about this slide, progressive web applications, if I'm not mistaken, was sponsored by Google. And naturally, they have a lot of power. And now it's somewhat adopted by the marketplace. When you want to build DWAs, how big is your team? How much resources can you count on so that what you're trying to do will actually be executed over those 2 years of your roadmap?
Yeah, so you know, just so we're clear, like, you know, Microsoft obviously supported many of these technologies already, and you'll see them rolling out to production this fall with Microsoft Entra Verified ID, which is their DID and verifiable credential solution. They've actually already implemented a little bit of the DWebNet spec, but we're a block, you know, we want to turn TBD, which is currently about a 30-person org, into a 1,000-person org, right, within the span of a couple of years. So Jack Dorsey certainly committed to this work, has called it maybe potentially the biggest thing he's done in his career to hopefully give back a little bit to the web. We're staffing up to be able to do this. The cool thing about the transition from PWAs to DWAs that you see on the screen is it is not reliant so much on Google agreeing, right? These are technologies you can import into your apps, and you don't need to get permission from Google to do this, to create an app of this type. And that's great, right? We don't actually need browser embedded technologies at first to be able to get this going. Would it help? You know, could we do even cooler things? Yeah, certainly we could. But I think in the fullness of time, and we have some partnerships with some large organizations in the browser vendor sphere that, you know, we might be public you know, sometime soon. I think that'll make it easier to get any of the additional things inside the actual web platform vendor and web browsers a more feasible task.
Thank you very much. Luis has a question too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. One quick question. I see from nowadays as is many identities to be used from Google, Apple ID, Microsoft, and so on. Do you see this, or at least I see myself seeing this as a decentralized but unifying for all the other IDs and having different, you know, repositories where you can validate the ID. Could you detail a little bit more how you see it from, just say, coming from Microsoft and seeing that all the other ones will be included, or is it something that is more specific?
Yes. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, those are typically federated identifiers based on, you know, email addresses being your ID, you know, essentially owned by providers. What we hope to get to is a world where DIDs are the common substrate. And, we probably will have federated identifiers for a while, but we hope that your IDs that you use, whether it's, public ID for social purposes, or it's a, career type ID that you would share resume details and career stuff with, or personal one that you keep for your own stuff, that they are based on IDs that you fundamentally own in the same way that you might own Bitcoin, and no one can take that from you if you don't give them the keys or send them your Bitcoin. It's the same principle here. Like you should own your core identifiers, regardless of what anyone else wants to claim about them. Whether you have a driver's license tied to one or not is orthogonal, right? The government doesn't give us identity. We are people, independent of any jurisdictional authorities. We still exist on the planet, and I think we should still digitally exist independent of those things too. So we do hope that they replace the federated identifiers of today that kind of rat you out a little bit when you use them online in many scenarios, give undue callback style information to these companies. Now, is that going to happen overnight? I don't think so, but I think we can slowly turn the ship if we're successful.
Many thanks. Is there any other question, people? Jörn. I was expecting this.
Well, the DID concept is very amazing, but the question is always, what happens if somebody gets hold on your private key, or what happens if you lose your private key and nobody can control it? So what role will authorities play in this case in order to block your identity because it has been stolen? And if it's completely decentralized, then there is no possibility to block your identity. If you provide the government with the possibility to block your identity, well, then you have government control again.
Yeah. So yeah, the public and private key, management thing is always a thing, right? It's always something you have to solve for. Now, there's certain semi-custodial solutions. There's, different key splitting techniques and social recovery and techniques that, everyone's exploring and that we're kind of trying to solve as an industry. That's just something that's part and parcel to owning something digitally. And then, I would say it's still actually the same problem with centralized identifiers. If someone hacks your Gmail account and gets a hold of it, I've heard tales where people obviously never get it back because, it's like Google doesn't typically have the 1-800 number where they're going to spend, any real amount of resources on you. So that's just as laborious. But what I would say about your last point about, does the government by de facto own your identity? Not really. They really play such a small role in human life. If you really think about the exchanges you do with government ID, I don't show my government ID hardly at all. I probably haven't shown my government ID to anyone in the last month. I'm old enough that I don't get carded if I go buy a beer anymore, so I don't really show it then. I haven't boarded a plane in a month, so I haven't shown it to anyone for that. It's very actually rare. So when I would say if governments are adversarial towards people, they can remove and revoke credentials. They can revoke your driver's license if you say get caught with a DUI and drinking or something. But that's a credential. That's not actually revoking your identity, which is your ID. Some of you might be on Twitter, right? You tweet from a pseudonymous ID. There's no government tie to that ID. The government doesn't dictate whether you are some X, Y, and Z on Twitter, right? So people have to understand the concept that most of their digital identity and ID interactions have nothing to do with government. So just keep in mind that government is actually a very small part of what you do online, and we can even if one is naughty and mean to you, it doesn't mean that you get erased from the digital sphere.
Is it fine? Okay. Thank you very much. And we thank the speaker again then